Hey everybody, I'm Jamie Trull. I'm a CPA, I am a profit strategist, and I'm a financial literacy coach for small business owners and self-employed individuals. And I am here to help you navigate all of the different stimulus things that are happening, including PPP, which is one of the big ones I get a ton of questions about. So this one, we're going to be talking a little bit about the taxability of the Paycheck Protection Program loan. What are the tax consequences? How exactly does this work? And we're going to dive a little bit into that. Importantly, if you want to know more about the taxability of any other stimulus programs, including unemployment, EIDL, the grant or the advance, and the stimulus checks, I have another video that covers all of those. So that will be linked down below. So go check out that video as well if those things are interesting to you. But I made a separate video for PPP. Why? Because PPP is probably the most complicated one. So why is it the most complicated one? Well, you can ask Congress and the IRS why, but I want to give a little bit of background first, but before I even start talking about the tax consequences of PPP. Now, first and foremost, I have got to give a big old disclaimer. This is not to be considered tax advice. I am not your personal tax preparer or tax planner. So definitely make sure, especially this year, you guys, even if you've never used a tax accountant in your entire life, I want you to get with a tax person this year. And by that, I mean 2020, to make sure that you're prepared for what is going to happen with your 2020 taxes, because all of these different stimulus things do have impacts to some degree or can have impacts. And there's a lot of things that can be missed or done incorrectly. So make sure you find a CPA or an EA to do your taxes that you can trust and start meeting with them sooner rather than later. Make sure they understand this stuff as well, okay? So that's my caveat. This is not tax advice. Also, these things are still changing. So let's talk a little bit about what the history is on how we got to where we are, and then I will explain exactly about the taxability. So interestingly enough, when the CARES Act was passed, Congress said this money is not taxable. Okay, it's not taxable as business income. It does not count as business income to you as a business owner. So we all kind of shouted and said, yay, that's great, that's amazing. PPP is not taxable. But I think there were a lot of CPAs and people who were in this sphere that kind of thought, okay, how's this going to play out exactly? Because just because the income isn't taxable, that does not mean that there can't be some tax consequences to getting a PPP loan. So flash forward a couple of months later, the IRS back in the late spring, early summer came out with additional guidance. So anything that wasn't covered in the bill basically gets put to either Treasury or the IRS to make a decision on. And in this case, it was the IRS's jurisdiction because it relates to taxability. And the IRS said, actually, that's fine. The income won't be taxable, but any amounts that you pay with forgiven PPP money, only if forgiven, right? Any expenses that you pay, any rent that you pay, any payroll that you pay and get forgiven for, you will not be able to deduct those expenses on your taxes. So what does that do? Well, it kind of backs into sort of the same answer at the end of the day for the most part. Now, there are some exceptions specifically for my sole proprietors and LLCs, which I will talk about here in a little bit. But ultimately, if you are spending that money, you will not be able to deduct those expenses if you get that PPP money forgiven. So if you got $30,000 in PPP, you spent all of it on rent and payroll for your employees, none of those expenses, those $30,000 will not be deductible. Now, your rent for the rest of the year would be. So some people kind of took that pretty extremely to say, well, wait a second, if I paid 2 months worth of rent with PPP, does that mean my whole year's worth of rent is not deductible? No. So the amount of deductions that are limited is maxed out at the amount of PPP you actually spent and had forgiven, okay? So that's important to note. But that's why it's so important to actually be tracking what you're spending PPP on. Not just because you're going to have to give them that when you apply for forgiveness, you're going to have to say, here's what I spent my money on, but also because you are going to then have to pull those out when you do your tax return. Now, people ask me about recording that. I would definitely still record those amounts and those expenses on your P&L, but somehow tag them, either put them in a different account, or if you are in a QuickBooks that has class tracking, maybe assign a PPP class track to it. so that you can easily see what you have spent your PPP money on. Also, make sure you're using some kind of a spreadsheet to make sure that you are capturing all of that. If you don't have one, I have a great one that we put a ton of time and effort into that actually will fill out your PPP application for you. It'll help you do your FTE calculation. It'll help you figure out if you meet safe harbor. Go download that if you don't already have it, jamietrull.com/PPP tracker. Okay. And that will be really, really helpful for you to have all of that tracked in one place, exactly what you spent the money on. But I do recommend that you also track it within your QuickBooks. Again, a bookkeeper might be able to help you with that too. Importantly though, when you first get your PPP loan, that should not go to your P&L, because when you get your PPP loan, it's still a loan, you guys. So that goes to the liability section of your balance sheet, just like any other loan would. When that gets forgiven, it will move to an other income account, preferably an other non-taxable income, maybe dash PPP, something like that, to where it's really obvious. Maybe create a new account in your QuickBooks chart of accounts or something like that so that you can see that separately on your P&L, and your CPA can see that separately on your P&L as well, right? And then you'll track all of those expenses you paid with it too. That'll stay on your P&L, but your tax advisor, when they prepare your taxes, will adjust for those expenses if your PPP loan has been forgiven, okay? So that's really the implications of the PPP loan on taxes. Now, importantly, that could change. I have to say it. The AICPA, a little while after getting the IRS ruling, the AICPA came out and said, actually, we don't agree with this. The AICPA said, we think the entire thing should be non-taxable, and so therefore we are going to write a letter to recommend that it be non-taxable. So you may see something like that change in the future. I would still prepare for the fact that you won't be able to deduct those expenses. I think that that's the most conservative method. That's the safest method to make sure you don't get surprised with a giant tax bill later on because you assumed that you were going to get those deductions, okay? So work with a tax advisor on what that means to you, because it is going to be highly dependent on your own tax situation, what your own tax rates are, as to what the impact of that will be. But you do want to be aware that more than likely, those expenses are not going to be deductible. Some of the stimulus talks that they're having right now it's September 2nd, it's important to say because things are moving quickly. Some of the discussions that they're having with the stimulus have mentioned that the intention of Congress was for it to be fully tax-free and that they are against this IRS ruling. But so far, nothing has been passed that would negate that, and the IRS has not come back and reversed it. Again, we'll have to watch that through kind of the end of the year and maybe even into next year to see how all this plays out in real time. So I know I mentioned earlier how there is a slight bit of an exception for those of you who might be my sole proprietors, LLC, non-corporate. So my LLCs that have not elected to be taxed as an S Corp or a C Corp. If it's just you, let's say you're just paying yourself, or at least that's part of what you're paying, for payments made to yourself that are Schedule C type payments, okay, those are not deductible anyway. So those payments that you make to yourself typically don't get deducted on your Schedule C. So if you use your PPP loan then to pay yourself, right, and now if you got the right amount of your PPP loan, you can technically use that PPP loan to entirely pay yourself. So if you got a PPP loan, it was your Schedule C, line 31, divided by 12 times 2.5. That's what you can pay yourself. That will not impact your tax deductions. Why? Because it's not a tax deduction for you anyway. You only get a tax deduction for your payment to yourself if you are a corp and pay yourself via payroll and they have a different situation for them. And in that case, that wouldn't be deductible. But for you guys, it actually doesn't change anything. So that's an important concept. I've had some people ask me, I've had a lot of sole proprietors that have said, hey, I was going to use it over 8 weeks and just pay myself for 8 weeks and then use the rest of it for rent. Okay. I don't recommend that because of the fact that rent is an expense that if you paid PPP with it, you wouldn't be able to then deduct that. If you pay yourself the entire thing by selecting the 24 weeks, which you can do, right? And you pay yourself the entire amount, then that's not going to impact your taxes. It's not going to take away any of your deductions if you pay it all to yourself. It will take away your deductions if part of what you're getting forgiven for is rent or something like that. So that's why I recommend, if you don't have employees, if it's only you that you're paying, just pay yourself the full amount, assuming you got the right amount. If you didn't, it's a whole nother story. Go talk to your tax advisor, though. That's the best place to go, and just sense check all of this and what works for your specific situation, because guess what? We're all different. So again, make sure that you go download that PPP tracker. Make sure you subscribe to my YouTube channel. Every single Friday right now, I'm doing Q&As on the stimulus, so make sure to join us. They're live. You can ask your questions to me live, or you can see any updates. You can see past updates also on my YouTube channel that kind of give you the lay of the land for where we are as of today and anything new that has come out. Because while it isn't changing quite as fast as it was, say, a few months ago, things are still changing, and there are things you want to make sure that you're aware of because they can impact you significantly. Remember, if you want to know more about the taxability of EIDL or unemployment or anything like that, the stimulus checks, all of that is in a video that's linked down below. And I've actually linked it right here on the screen as well, so that you can just click on that and go watch. So I'll talk to you guys next time and see you soon.